It was somewhat of a struggle, but I managed to top 8 my second PQ here in Season 0. Tarkintown got me the first one in the previous set, but now after this past weekend at Red Cap's Corner in Philadelphia, I was able to get there with Sabine Tarkintown. And yeah, I know there's probably a few people wondering how that worked, and we're going to talk about it. Since Jump to Lightspeed is closing in, and of course this particular set of PQs this season is waning, I wanted to spend some time talking about both the deck, my matchups, my experiences, and very briefly at the end, my thoughts on this particular meta. First things first, I always want to start out with shoutouts to, in this case, a variety of different people for a whole slew of different things. First up, of course, is Red Cap's Corner. Shout out to Ben, the judges, the entire Red Caps team, because they put in a ton of effort and hosted a spectacular event. We were joking about it on site, but I didn't realize until during our lunch break that Ben had actually posted a listing of when the rounds are going to start with actual timestamps. And if you played in any kind of card game tournament prior to this, anywhere for any game, you know that they tend to run late by just a little few several hours, sometimes more. Ben was actually ahead of schedule the entire time, which is actually just mind-blowing. This is a 105 player event, and on top of that, Ben went the extra length because I've been very critical of FFG that they do not provide enough to stores as far as prizes go to hand out to players. Sure, we get the promos, and I think they send them one case of product, but for an event this size, and especially considering the scope of it, I think that they need to do more. However, Ben, as well as a number of other TOs at other PQs, have gone above and beyond, and he provided a slew of prizes all the way out to top 64. So I saw a number of people lining up towards the end of the event that they got to go home with something after maybe their first experience at a larger event. And that's something that does stick with you and allows you to build communities, both for the store as well as for the game. Also, I want to thank Ben for giving me the opportunity to host the Stream B for the event. It was live, recording up through the top 4. And then the finals, of course, were on Stream A, which is running the entire time. They did a spectacular job, and we'll get to that momentarily. Secondly, I have to mention my locals. I play actually at Red Caps on Mondays, and then I try and hit up Top Deck on Tuesdays and Alternate Universes on Wednesdays. But a number of the players from each of those locals were present at this particular PQ, and a number of them had some pretty solid finishes. So shout out to all of them. There's way too many to name every single one, but you guys know who you are. So I appreciate you guys definitely supporting me, and pretty much everybody came up to me at the end of the event, both to say congratulations and to cheer me on when I got my top 8. In particular, I want to shout out John because he also got a top 8 berth, squeaking in there with Han Green. I know he put in a ton of work this season trying to prep for this event, so shout out to John. Of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't also shout out all my opponents. If you played at any kind of event, the atmosphere for the event, which is driven not exclusively, but primarily by the person who's sitting across from you who is trying to defeat you, will define your experience at that particular event. I've had the good fortune, the blessing that all of my opponents have been awesome, and this event was no exception. Every opponent, every round was great. They were a pleasure to talk to, a pleasure to play with, and I'm absolutely looking forward to seeing how each of them do at future events, because I fully expect that we're going to see a lot of these names again. Next, I want to give a shout out to KTOD. I'm not part of the team. There was some representation from KTOD at the event, as well as a huge variety of other teams like McClunky, Hopper, obviously Golden Dice, aforementioned KTOD, and I'm probably forgetting some, but there were some heavy hitters at this particular event. But I want to call out KTOD, specifically Chrono, because Chrono provided this list in the KTOD server, and I cannot take credit as the pilot. I just was there, I shuffled the cards, I put them into play, but the deck is spectacular and absolutely carried me to this finish. So shout out to all of them because there was a lot of work in creating this list, testing it, and preparing it for this particular meta. Lastly, I want to give a shout out to Golden Dice. I mentioned them a little bit earlier, but they were running Stream A for this event. You can catch them on YouTube. You should definitely go check out the coverage because it is always spectacular from the casters that they brought in. But The production from Golden Dice is incredible, and congratulations, Jackie. You actually knocked me out of the top 8. Very well done. Now, with that out of the way, let's get to the meat and potatoes of the discussion, and that is the deck itself, what carried me to this 5th place finish. And as mentioned, this was a list I took from Chrono. Throughout testing and even during the PQ itself, I was joking with my opponents, honestly, probably anyone within earshot, that this deck is just an army of idiots. A joke from years ago was never underestimate the power of stupid people in large numbers. And if you're living in the United States, that may be a little more poignant than ever. But that's a different discussion. We're going to talk about this particular army of idiots. One of the big advantages for this particular list can be exemplified in an exchange that more or less I had with every single person that I spoke to that kind of went like this. They would say to me, hey, what are you playing today? And I'd say, Sabine. And they go, oh, all right. And then I was like, I didn't quite finish. I'm playing Sabine Tarkintown. And they would just stare at me for a second and go, what the f? And that's almost a direct quote from a variety of opponents. There were a few that knew exactly, like I sat down, I put it on the table, and they knew exactly what was coming. But most of them, I think, were taken aback. And as I mentioned, pretty much all the bystanders were definitely shocked when I said I wasn't running ECL. There's something to be said for playing a little bit off meta just to make your opponent's brain work that much harder. So the premise of this deck and the entire goal is to open with 1-drop, 1-drop, and then follow up with 2-drop, 1-drop on the next turn, if at all possible. I think there's like one matchup where you wouldn't necessarily want that. Everywhere else, and maybe even there, you're going to want to just overwhelm them with idiots. But as soon as you start flooding the board with an overwhelming amount of little gremlins, your opponent goes from treading water to being dragged to a watery grave very quickly. Generally speaking, you aren't even really very concerned with which 1-drops are being played as long as you can play 2 of them. Sure, if it's a ping-heavy deck, maybe Mr. Bones, which, by the way, is... I don't know who Mr. Bones is in lore. Somebody explained it to me and I already forgot on Saturday, but he is my favorite 1-drop. I Performed Violence makes me laugh every time I read it. So he may not be the ideal choice against a ping deck, but if you sequence it so that, hey, they look at the other guy first, or maybe you want to offer them up that target, or they might just not have it. They may not be able to deal with him. But the bigger point is, even if they do, you still have another body on the board that's now able to run amok. After turn 1 and 2, though, that's where things get really scary for your opponent. More than one time on the day, I was able to deal, say, 17 to an opponent on the Sabine flip turn. And shocker, that closed an enormous amount of games. Now, everyone at this point knows the threat of Darksaber. That's a big reason on why I was able to deal so much damage in such a short time frame. Now, we just finished talking about the army of idiots that comprise a good chunk of this deck's base of units, and they play a crucial role in setting up either Darksaber or Armed to the Teeth, the aggression plays, the wing leader plays, all of those things that we're going to talk about, because they afford you somewhere between 3 and 5 additional actions beyond what your opponent can do on the 4 resource turn. This means that when you go to deploy Sabine, you end up being able to stall it out for a long time. And if your opponent wants to just pass, eventually you can just claim because you still have your army. And then maybe you just load her up with a sword or a gun next turn instead. However, if they do claim, great. Your Darksaber is now free and clear, and honestly, it's more of a hammer than a sword at this point. You just pulverize them. Additionally, there's 6 Mandalorian units in the deck, so it's not uncommon that you're just handing out extra XP, because why not? So let's say you don't have Darksaber. No problem. You essentially have 5 more for a total of 8 Darksabers thanks to Wing Leader and Armed to the Teeth. Now, the guns in particular are fantastic for a few different reasons. You can just sort of stall, thanks to how many units you can spam, and say you leave R2-D2 back as your last attack. Now you can deploy Sabine, give her the guns, and buff R2, and odds are your opponent's going to be none the wiser because, yeah, you probably just attack with R2 last, unless you wanted to ping a shield on a village people or something like that. Probably couldn't do anything about it anyway, because again, you can just dirtle with so many actions for so long. On top of that, the smuggle on Armed to the Teeth means that you can dodge discard that would have ordinarily addressed Darksaber. So sure, you can keep it in your hand and they waste time resources and cards hitting Spark of Rebellion that may or may not hit a Saber. And then you just smuggle Arms to the Teeth anyway, and it's the same amount of damage output because it's a +4, but across 2 different bodies. This is, of course, before you get to any potential shenanigans that you can pull off with the ready text on aggression, card aggression. Which brings us up to Dark Saber's numbers 9, 10, and 11, effectively. Aggression serves a variety of different roles in this list. Starting with the untap, it readies nearly every unit in this deck, just baseline. However, it can also ready buffed units. Be careful with the buffs, giving Raid from Benthic versus Arm to the Teeth. Got to keep that in mind. But speaking of Benthic, he is the real monster here when this happens. Have you ever had a Partisan Insurgent deal 10 damage in a turn? Because most people are not in a position to just mentally process that sort of play. And that's only scratching the surface with some of the nonsense that you can pull off. Moving beyond the ready effect, you also get removal attached to aggression, which conveniently removes several annoying threats. It could be Child Sin, it could be Village People, or it could be Public Enemy number 1, Millennium Falcon. All while providing additional value with a second set of powers. The 4 damage is obvious, but how are we one-shotting Village People or Child Sin? Well, you pop the shields, or experience, respectively, and then deal the 4 damage. I guess in Child Sin you could deal the 4 and then pop the experience, the same thing. The upgrade removal is crucial in a variety of other scenarios as well. Bosk, of course, is obvious. Bounties just go bye-bye. But even in the Sabine mirror, you can break their tempo in a massive, massive way by snapping a Darksaber in half and then killing a threat, or readying one of yours and pushing for more damage. Remember the whole add raid to Partisan Insurgents and then swing in again thing? Now, the sideboard is pretty straightforward. You board in Chaos versus decks that could draw a lot, anti-upgrades for bounties or opposing sabers. Spec Force is, I guess, a little more complex because clearly it comes in when you're expecting a ton of Sentinels, but also when Mr. Bones might be just slightly too frail. Grenade Strike is intended for Django, but personally I managed to dodge them all day, and I'm very thankful for that. Now, let's talk about the matchups themselves. Over the course of the day, I ultimately ended up playing 8 total rounds. The 7 Swiss rounds, followed by where I got eliminated in the top 8. I played against a number of people that I met for the first time, as well as a few people that I had met at previous events. As far as how the matchups themselves played, though, the specifics, the actual things that happen, there isn't too much to say, and the reason for that is this. All of my wins were 2-0, my losses were 1-2, and any game that I won was not close. I just created an army of idiots and let them roll over my opponent. And the deck did what it's supposed to do. It is highly consistent, and the matchups that I happened to see were mostly favorable. We'll talk a little bit about Han Yellow, because that is one that is not favorable and can actually cause some issues. I do believe that this deck, this version of Sabine, happens to line up better into Han Yellow than the more traditional Sabine ECL. The reason for that is you can go wider, you aren't necessarily as impacted by some of the things that they can do, but you are still vulnerable to many of the same tools. Cunning is still a card. Turn 1 Falcon against a 25 health base can absolutely race you, and of course, they have either hotshot blasters and or surprise strikes and or whatever else they can do to disrupt you, buff their guys, play their guys, and they have a 30 health base. So at the end of the day, it's still an uphill battle, and you're going to have some problems in this particular matchup. Specifically, I was able to win one of them because my opponent was unable to find the turn 1 Falcon, and they were unable to apply the Cunnings in the way they wanted. So I was able to run them over. But if you go back and watch the Golden Dice stream, I ended up throwing away a couple of opportunities that maybe I snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. The matchup is by no means easy, but it is absolutely winnable if you can find certain cards and you're able to engineer certain scenarios. You do have the tools, but a fight is going to be a fight. So overall, I didn't really sideboard all day. There were a handful of things, like occasionally a Spec Force came in, occasionally I put in the Chaos of War. But for the most part, the first 50 cards were more than enough to get the job done. And I do think the advantage of just about everybody sitting down and going, I am not really clear on what you're playing. And I even had people would openly say, well, you have aggression, but what other double red cards are there? And they're like trying to struggle to recall them all. And again, that's the advantage. The deck is strong, but as Chrono put it, it's a tier 2 deck that needs to see specific matchups. I was fortunate enough to hit those matchups, of course, as opposed to seeing Sabines and Djangos all day, which would have made my life some sort of hell. Now, there isn't much set 3 meta left, but it seems as though mono red might really be a thing in set 4, so it's worth investigating. And if nothing else, the be wider plan is something that lines up pretty well right now, and it might happen and continue in set 4. Bottom line is, if there was a PQ next weekend and I was going to it for this set, I would run this back for sure. So here's the hot take version, hot take portion of the video, hot take section of the video. Hopefully people made it this far, and hopefully you'll stick with me. I'm going to keep this super short. If you're interested in hearing the longer version, by all means, let me know down in the comments, or if you have any questions, whatever, hit up the comments. My Discord link is down there, all my other content, all that kind of stuff. Just a shameless plug there. I had significantly more people tell me post Boba ban, so set 3 meta, Boba's gone, that they were considering quitting the game in a serious fashion. This wasn't, I hate this game, I'm just frustrated tonight. No, this is a repeated thing from different individuals over the course of this entire meta, and I had significantly more people say that now than I did when Boba was at its highest height for its reign of terror. What do I mean by significantly? There were literally 0 people who told me that. Now, the context here is I'm talking about my locals. I'm talking about people that I have personally talked to. I'm not worried about Reddit posts because anybody will say anything on the internet. But it was goose egg before Boba got banned. It was not goose egg post Boba ban. And to be honest, I can't blame them. I never intended to quit. I do really enjoy this game. But I can tell you I was not enjoying this set. I was not enjoying this meta. There's a variety of different reasons why. And they're all kind of interrelated, and it starts getting very complex. Now, set 4 seems really promising. And I got to be honest, for the first time in many, many months, I'm actually excited for the next set that's coming out. We'll see how this actually plays out. I will add that I think 100% of people that I spoke to at the PQ gave me some variation of, yeah, I'm done with set 3. I'm ready for set 4. They probably didn't mean it in the same way that I was saying that phrase, but it is something to consider. Everybody's going to get tired of metas towards the end, the tail end of them, or maybe not everybody. I don't. Most people do. And I think that's fine. It's healthy. It's normal. And I'm not saying that Boba should come back necessarily. I'm not saying that it was incorrect to ban it or anything like that. But the bottom line is that I know I was having way less fun in set 3 than I was in set 2. And I've been trying to figure out exactly why so that I can fix it. So I'll leave it at that. Now, if anybody has any comments or questions, like I said earlier, feel free to hit me up in the comments or reach out to me on Discord. I'm going to be trying to go to as many events as I can. I don't know if I'm going to make it to Worlds or any of the regionals or sectors just because of real life stuff, but we'll see. I will also, as mentioned earlier, get the footage from the event up onto YouTube, onto this channel as quickly as I can. But one, it's a lot of editing. It's full stop. 2, it's a dead meta. So I don't know how much anybody cares. Just saying. But that's going to do it for this time. So as always, everybody, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And tune in next time for more Random's Thoughts.